Hey, it's NoirVortex. This is going to be a, well, not completely new, but a new in name sort of video series I do where I think of a topic and just do a stream of consciousness about that topic, or it's basically influenced by just walking around thinking about different subjects, what's on my mind philosophically at the minute. Without further ado, I've been thinking while I was walking around about the phrase the pessimism of ideology. So I'll just talk a bit about some concepts and thinking that have been going around my head recently, just while mostly to do with ideology, the position, politics, modern day contemporary politics. Might be possibly retreading some ground I've already been over before, but it's kind of hard to avoid that in some respects often. You know, you retread familiar ground again and again. From a slightly different angle, sometimes you get something that's generally really new, but anyway, without further ado, what I really mean by this sort of fatiguing term, the pessimism of ideology, I guess and there's this, I'm just thinking this stuff in my head, so this will be very rough and raw. I guess in our sort of information saturated time, it's very easy to feel that ideologies have reached the limits of their having or being able to provide answers. Now, I guess this is sort of related to like Fukushima and the end of history and all that sort of thing, like neoliberal ideas. So it can be quite a dodgy territory to get into, I guess. But I don't know, I think it's worth exploring. Like, has ideology, or sort of, whether it be socialist economics and socialist, communist, sort of anarchist philosophy and tendencies, and sort of capitalist right-wing tendencies, they all, I know I'm not explaining myself very well, but I'm just trying to think of this off the top of my head. So obviously all of these systems of thought have a endpoint. They have, well, I mean, I suppose conservatism has conservation of the existing order as part of its overarching part of its philosophy, but most of these even also right wing, I mean, it is more of a tendency on the left to have these sort of like end goal, what is our end goal aims, but it does exist on the right as well, especially more so on the far right, where you have the idea of sort of ethno states and all the rest of it, and very extreme or racist, fucking shitty endpoints. But yeah, they've every ideology built into it has the idea of we are progressing towards something. The whole reason that we're implementing social change is to get to an endpoint. Now that's obvious, really. But I guess, I mean, if you look at it historically, that's where you've sort of had the idea of the ends justify the means. So, obviously in communism's case, in the Soviet Union, the ends justify the means was, well, we're working towards the end of history. We're working towards the end point of history, which is the fully communist state, which in theory would have been stateless, no government or no dictatorship of the proletariat. So the constant thing was that we were constantly working towards this end point. It's sort of utopian idea, of course. Interestingly enough, utopia, of course, means no place. It's translated from Greek. Its Greek root means no place, which is sort of interesting. But probably anyone watching this probably already knows that anyway. But it's hard. It's hard these days to sort of try and come up with, to sort of feel confident in any position. I suppose in some respects, if you don't want to be a completely woolly non-specific liberal, and you have to define yourself and your political beliefs based on principles, I suppose, which often touches on that, like, what is the ideal world that you want to see? And then once you've worked that part out, then you can sort of backtrack and figure out individual issues you're interested in. I mean, politics is just really, I'm very disengaged of it, to be honest. It's just becoming so tribal, but it is by its very nature tribal, I suppose, as well. Like, there is no escaping the fact that politics, I mean, the reason we have this idea of the left and the right is that because they represent divisions in understanding of the social world, understanding of where you want to go. One is about preservation, the right wing, one is about progression. Obviously, there's some intermingling between those two forms, but in terms of classical liberalism was about progression of social values in the social order, whereas conservatism is about preservation. And further on the right, you have fascism, authoritarianism, and it's interesting as well because when you go to the extremes of both, and I know I'm coming off as centrist dad here, but it's sort of true. When you go to the extreme ends of both, like authoritarian leftists and authoritarian right wingers, the authoritarian leftists might have a sort of utopian end goal in mind, which might actually sound quite nice, which is the whole idea of equality from each to according to his abilities, to each to according to his needs. But I've been thinking a bit about this, funnily enough, while I was in Burger King earlier on, because I'm a hypocritical lefty who eats at Burger King. But I was having some thoughts in Burger King earlier on, as you do when you're eating a burger. I was thinking about what was I thinking about? So, and it's partially because I've been looking into God Emperor Dune series, funnily enough, as well, where everything is this sort of, everybody has the same standard of living, basically, in that story, from what I understand. I've not read it, I just was reading into the audio version of it, just because I'm sort of looking into science fiction and stories and all that recently. And basically in that, all want is taken away, all needs are met. So it is that sort of classical Marxist phrase of from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. So that, you know, if you have more surplus, the way I've always understood that is that I guess labour power and resources are allocated. Let me rephrase that. Resources are allocated based on need. Those who can provide more will provide more to those who need more. That's how I've always. It's like a flattening out of resource allocation. So that's obviously quite a revolutionary idea, but it's also I don't know. It just sort of seems in practice. I mean, it's never really worked in practice. If you look at the one of the big problems I think they had in the Soviet Union's economy was the fact that they had no way of anticipating demand for products, so there was always empty shelves for some products because people wanted more of a certain thing. Whereas if it's, if it's a centrally planned economy, command economy, then how can you anticipate demand? The supply is not always going to be there, which is an obvious argument. I'm sure there's arguments that, in theory, that you could somehow fix that in a socialist or communist economy, but none that I'm aware of, to be honest, not being a Marxist economist myself. In fact, I only really have a passing interest in these things, to be honest. But I do like thinking about them from a philosophical standpoint anyway, somewhat. So I should probably do more of that now. So I don't know. I just sort of feel lost politically at the minute. I guess a lot of people do. I don't feel like there's a strong progressive left vision that's really worth investing in. I mean, obviously Trump's gone, which is good in America, but Trump was just represented a sort of I don't know. I mean, what did Trump represent really? He was sort of a malignant narcissist with who just represented himself. He was like a like a sort of weird hyper real version of I don't know. I mean, I can think of no other way to describe it, but a hyper real sort of version of the worst sort of degeneration of the US has been occurring in the last decades, maybe. Sort of like this anti-intellectualism, this sort of I don't know, just appealing to the worst aspects of human nature. And like, I'm not one of these lefty types who thinks that Trump was the absolute worst. Like, I mean, I think he was bad, but Bush in a lot of ways was worse. I mean, he started a war. So I recognise that there is. I'm not saying it's a good thing that Trump didn't start a war, but at least he didn't get involved in any real. Well, didn't have enough time. Maybe that's the other thing. It would have been interesting if the US had been attacked during Trump's watch. Like had a serious attack, like on the scale of 9/11. But thankfully, that hasn't happened. Anyway, don't want to ramble on about Trump. So the original topic was the ideology of pessimism. Pessimism of ideology. So no, I mean, I guess in a lot of respects, I think where all ideologies fail, whether it be left wing, right wing, centrist, blah 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 blah, they all fail in the sense that human beings are complicated, contradictory messes. So, you know, in your sort of communist utopian society, everybody works for each other. There's no selfishness. Everyone's completely selfless, and everybody, which is all going well in theory, but in practice, some people are extremely selfish. Some people are extremely competitive. That is the driving force now, like in the biological drives in some people. They you know, often it's talked of as a masculine trait to be very competitive. So, yeah, can you socially engineer that out of people? It's been tried. It's failed many times. As for the right wing, like sort of pipe dreams, it's, you know, they're easier to critique. I mean, if it's the extreme right, then it's basically just isolationist, racist, nationalist, a bunch of other concepts which are just basically about reducing, very, you know, reductive, basically. So what's the answer? I mean, without wanting to be glib, and which I am being a lot, really, how can you find any sense of hope in this scenario? I mean, here's the hopeful part of it. Like, we live in a society. We do live in a society. Relative living standards are still quite high across most of the world. Not every part of the world, of course, but in the developed world, we've got access to technology which is incredible. You know, we've got access to great communication tools, which, you know, especially when you think during COVID, imagine COVID before pre-internet age, it would have just been sort of a lot harder, because you wouldn't have been able to stay in touch with people. Everyone would be very isolated. Some people might even be just completely isolated. So imagining a pre-internet age without that, it would have been, I imagine the suicide rate would have been a lot higher. So we have many things to be thankful for. And I'm not saying like, not saying like this is the where we're at now in terms of, I mean, nothing. How could I say that? Everything's in flux all the time. We have reached the ultimate end of history, Fukuyamaism stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm just, like I said, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of naturally pessimistic about any one who's really ideologically, um, especially in politics. I mean, call me cynical, and I am a bit of a cynic, but I just, I don't know. If someone was trying to sell me a grand vision, my natural inclination is to be cynical about it, but even with regards to politics.